Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, and today we are going to talk about JavaScript round. As the name suggests, it tests your core JavaScript knowledge, how you know fundamentals of JavaScript and how JavaScript works, how JavaScript executed in different environments, and other concepts of JavaScript. So we'll talk about a lot of things in this video. We'll see the entire structure, how you can go about learning JavaScript, or go about giving JavaScript interview, what are the things you need to concentrate. But this video will be mostly not on the JavaScript questions, but this will be mostly on JavaScript structure, how you would go about and learn about JavaScript and for its interview purpose as well, right? So we'll dive into that. I prepared a slide for you to look into how you can go about that, but this video will be solely learning JavaScript perspective, and after learning you can give the interviews as well. So the main goal of this video is that. So let's go ahead and directly see into that without wasting much time. But before that, do hit the subscribe button if you like my work, and if these videos or this series is adding some value to your skill set, and do share this video with your friends and like this video. I'll see you in the screencast. Hello everyone, hello again, and this is a slide set that we have prepared, and we'll go through this slide set and look what are the things you need to look for a JavaScript round. So without further ado, let's get started. So welcome. So first and foremost, when you're getting started with JavaScript, you should understand how JavaScript works, how execution context work. So what is the execution context and how execution context works, how it is created, how your code, JavaScript code, is executed in browser or any other environment as well where your code is getting executed, how JS engine works, how your JS engines are embedded into browsers or any other platforms as well, and how these JS engines are coming in place when your code is executed by a browser, right? Whenever you are writing a JavaScript code, there will be always a memory created, deleted. Whenever you are creating function, there will be memory created, deleted, and other things like that. So you need to understand how this memory are created and deleted with the timing. So these three things are going ahead with understanding the basic working of JavaScript before moving to the concepts of JavaScript. So when you move ahead, start with the basics. For example, if you're a HTML, CSS, and JavaScript developer or front-end developer, you might always know JavaScript, but as I told, like, this will be a structure to JavaScript moreover all, considering you have interviews ahead as well. So first you need to go with basic documentation. Basic documentation means here is commenting your code, how you're writing comments and how you're writing multi-lines comment, right? How you are documenting your entire code, how you're documenting your functions or variables, like that, right? So that is very important. Most of the people ignore it, and it is not recommended that, because you have to always comment your code so other people can also didn't understand. So there are certain core concepts of JavaScript like variables, operator, condition, and loops. For example, this is not core concept of JavaScript, it's a core concept of programming itself. So it's also available in JavaScript. So once you go ahead and learn these things, you need to practice a bit about it, like how to create a variable and operators, how operators apply, how precedents work in JavaScript, how to write loop, and what are the different kind of loops, right? Then move on to functions, how you're writing functions. So once you have your code, you can divide it into various functions as well, right? So how you're writing functions, important thing, arrays and objects. After array is one of the most used concept when you're writing codes, right? So if you're listing something, you probably use an array. Objects are one of the most important concepts in JavaScript. Again, they are building block of JavaScript. You can say everything in object, everything in JavaScript is an object, for example, inherited from an object, right? So objects are very important. There are other concepts of objects are there in JavaScript as well, right? Like prototype and all. So we'll come to that later, but objects are also important, how created object and all, right? You need to understand various DOM manipulation concept, like get element by ID, class, or query selector, various things, right? Then you need to understand how you attach and detach event from DOM node element, right? So you have to understand everything, how you're manipulating, because ultimately if you have a starting content using HTML and CSS, you need JavaScript to provide a dynamic content, and how we can provide a dynamic content by doing DOM manipulation, right? So this is very important. Again, going forward, again, array and string methods are required. Once you learn array, you not be implementing various things like sort or find or things like that in array. You generally use the function that are given by JavaScript. So you need to understand concept like map, filter, for each. There are array methods, right? So similarly, we have other string methods as well that you need to understand, right? After going forward, like debugging and using browser dev tools are again a very important one, because once your code is running in the browser, you are debugging it, you should know how to debug your code, so you can find any error or defects very easily. There are a lot of things in the browser dev tools like console or storage, local storage, and other things, application, network requests, how network requests are made, right? These things you need to understand, which makes you a good JavaScript developer basically. Let's move forward. So ES6 is one of the latest version, not latest, like there are more version that came after ES6, but ES6 is the most used latest one right now, right? Because it has a lot of browser support now, right? So I'll start with let and const keyword. Before ES6 we used a lot of var and all, so it again comes down to using let and const, because there are a lot of difference between them. So after that, there are arrow function that were introduced in ES6. So it's a good way of writing function, you can say, right? So there are a lot of things that differs, like scoping, how it is created and destroyed, right? Then the functions, right? So arrow function differs from function, and it is very important to understand the difference between them. So there are weak set and maps, and weak maps and sets. So you need to understand how and when you should use set, and how and when you should use map. You should understand the difference between two. You can understand the difference between both, like maps and weak maps. So like weak maps can have only objects as keys, and maps can have other primitive as well. So these things you need to understand, because this comes in handy. Multi-line string for commenting, or like for interpolation as well. Destructuring and rest and speed operator, this comes handy a lot when you're passing values as an object to a function. For example, if you were active React developer, you might be using this a lot when you're passing props to a component, and using rest and speed operator you can pass lot of parameters as well. So there are destructuring concept to that, and rest and speed operator concept to that. Modules is very important, because once it came into place, you can separate your code using different modules, or you can say to different JS files. So it is only like separating your code into different JS files, and using keywords like export and import to export and import your code respectively. Classes is, if you're coming from programming language, you already know classes, what classes is. So before ES6, classes, we used to handle JavaScript classes, something like classes, like from with the JavaScript function itself, right? But now it is, the class keyword is introduced in ES6, and it brings out a whole new set of possibility. So you can understand that. You should understand promises. Promises, what are reject and resolve. If you're doing a task, if it is successful, how you resolve a thing or how you reject a thing. You should understand that. Template literals, how you can interpolate a string, how you can use dynamic value in a string, and things like that. Function default parameter is again suppose if a function is there, if you're not passing in a value, you should take default parameter. So you might already know this, but this is coming from ES6 as well. Some core concepts like map and for each. If you're using array, map and for each is one. Null versus undefined, this is a very, very important from the interface perspective, right? We'll talk about this in the coming session, like we'll go deep dive and look how this differs, right? So let, const and var, with the introduction of let and const in ES6, and var from pre ES6, there are a lot of differences between them, right? With the hosting and other differences, right? So you have to understand that as well. Double equal to, triple equal to, how they differ, when comparing or using that, right? So after that, scopes comes in. For example, if you're introducing a variable, how that scope works, how scoping works in a function, right? So how let scope work, how const scope work, or how arrow function scope work, right? This thing you have to understand. Closure is again one of the most important topics in JavaScript, and you should definitely understand that closures, right? So closures advantages and disadvantages you should understand, because the most important topic. There are lot of advantage, but there are some disadvantage as well, like it takes extra memory and all, right? But there are a lot of things based on closure, like set timeout and other things as well, that is based on closure. So you should understand closure. Hosting is one of the most important concept. Again, when let and const introduction, hosting also become very important, how your variable are hosted, right? So this is also important. Moving on, function, we already talked about how you create a function and difference between functions and a normal function and a fat array function. You should understand higher order function are again passing function to a function or returning function. You should again understand how you do that in JavaScript. Map filter reduce is function programming concepts again, functional programming concept again in JavaScript. So it comes very handy if you understand that. So it is important to understand when you're coding. Function currying is one of the most important from the interview perspective, because it asks a lot, right? So you have to understand function create, and stay tuned. We'll definitely cover each of this in the preparation phase. Moving on, again, objects, we have already talked about. Objects are the most important and one of the important topics in JavaScript. When we come to objects and when classes were introduced in ES6, this keyword became one of the most important. Again, like this, how you acknowledge this, you need to understand how you acknowledge this when you are using this, which thing you refer to when you are using this, right? So you need to understand that. Call bind apply is one of again more important concept. So you might get to write a polyfill for call or bind or apply when you are giving interviews, right? So again, prototype and prototypal inheritance is again important topic in JavaScript. Lot of people don't understand it, but it's very important from the interview perspective as well, right? So how the prototype chain works, how the inheritance work in prototype. So ultimately everything goes to object and objects point to null. So everything is inherited from the object. So you need to understand that concept as well, right? I know there are a lot of things, but hold on a bit, right? So callbacks, right? As you know, JavaScript is synchronous and single threaded language. So how would you achieve asynchronous JavaScript, right? So there are a lot of things that goes in behind in us in JavaScript. First one is callbacks. It gives you ability to achieve asynchronity in a JavaScript. Callbacks are the function passed to a function, for example. So for example, you pass a function to a function. So it gives the ability to execute a parent function, for example, then this function that you have passed. So you can imagine executing function after some time. So it opens whole lot of new world in asynchronous JavaScript, right? So you even look one of the most important concept from the interview perspective, because it gives lot of information about the browser, how browser work, how micro queue works, how macro queue works, how priority is given to the various function that are going to execute for the browser, right? So how these things work. So event loop one is the most important question that can be asked directly, like explain event loop in detail, right? Timers, you should understand various timers like set timeout, set interval, clear interval. These are some important things that you need to look for, because this come handy when you are coding in JavaScript. There are a lot of places that you might use this. Again, promises we already talked about in ES6. Async await is one of the most important concept. So these are required when you are making an API call, waiting for it, and how you will be tackling that. So async await context again come in place. This is last one and the extended one. So when you're given interviews, I am pretty sure that some concept from here will definitely will be asked to you, right? So let's start with event bubbling and capturing. Whenever you have a web page, you click on something, click on it, this entire concept of event bubbling and event capturing comes in, right? You might have used something like event dot prevent default or event dot stop propagation, right? So in event bubbling and capturing, like the whole not new concept of moving event up, moving event down, various things comes in. So you have to understand everything about that, how your event is firing, when should you stop an event, when you should let the event go, things like that, right? So you might be using lot of time like e.prevent default or event.prevent default, event.stop propagation, right? Things like that. So you have to understand how this event bubbling and capturing works. Local storage, session storage. I bet like whenever building a front-end application, many of the time, more than 50% of time, local storage and session storage is used. For example, if you visit any site, right click, open DevTools, go to the application tab, go to the app local storage section, you might find something that is stored in your client, right? So they can visit, and when you visit, like there are some operations that could be done maybe, right? So if you visit some site like that limits your visiting that website, they might be storing something on the client side as well, right? So that also works. So there again comes session storage as well. That is again an important thing. So you have to understand how you set item or get item from local storage, how you use that window object or in session storage as well, right? Polyfills, again, you will be told to write some polyfills. You need to understand what are polyfills, how you write a polyfills, right? Suppose you have an old browser running in, how we write a polyfill for a newer version of something to execute in that older browser. So that is concept of entire polyfills. You might be told to write polyfills or pre-existing JavaScript function like bind or apply that we have talked previously, like debouncing and throttling. If you have seen my previous video, again this concept become very important when you are making an API call or doing some extensive operations. You need to understand how these two concept to reduce the calls, or how you optimize your application so you didn't make a lot of calls or a lot of function or a lot of stack is created, right? So you need to understand that. Script loading, again, whenever you are using HTML CSS, you might load your script in a HTML, right? So there are a lot of way to do that. Async and defer is one of them. So async, how you're loading a script, defer, how you're defer a script, how you asynchronous load a script. You need to understand and how to do that actually, right? In a script tag, how to put the type or things like that, right? Web workers, it is one of the most important when you are building something like plugin development environment or something like that. So web worker are simply running some web content in the background in a different thread, right? Background threads, right? So you can think of like that. So there is a web content and you want to run that in background threads, right? You can perform certain operation without inferring the user interface, right? That I am executing and things like that, right? CORS is known as cross origin resource sharing. So for example, you are into a domain, for example example.com, for example. Oh, that was like example.com, okay? And again, if you're making an API call, you might go to other server that is located into different resource name, for example server.com. You are calling something from example.com to server.com. So this is cross origin. You are not on the same origin anymore. You are crossing the origin and going to the other origin for any data, right? So you need to understand that how this works and in the browser and how this is achieved actually, right? So you need to understand these things, and this was pretty much of it. Understand this thing. It was kind of a roadmap to JavaScript, which can be turned into a interview preparation kit as well, right? So this was it, and stay tuned in this channel, in this series, because we are gonna cover all this concept in the preparation phase. We'll take one by one and explain each one of them and solve actually interview question on based on that. And thank you, and stay tuned. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if this is adding value, consider subscribing and like this video and share with anyone you feel like this can benefit them, right? And if you're sharing something and tag me, I would happy to reshare that. And again, thank you so much and glad you watched this video. I'll see you next time.